In one of my previous videos, I shredded Allie Louks' pretentious waste of electrons called a dissertation, where she connected smell and slavery, or something like that. Essentially, she read about 10 books that made some meaningful connection to odor or fragrance. She then made a connection to oppression, wrote it up, and mailed it in for a PhD. I cannot see how she spent more than 6 months completing her study, but in today's academic world, that's good enough for a doctorate, I guess. Just ask Jill Biden, although I doubt it took more than 2 months for hers. If you want to hear my dismantling of Jill Biden's dissertation, go here. Allie got her PhD at Cambridge, which fortunately is not in the United States. Because if she had gone to Harvard instead, I can all but guarantee you that she'd be screaming, "The government needs to forgive my student loans. How am I supposed to pay them back with a degree in English Lit?" But that argument is for another day. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With cold, blunt analysis cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnny Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's time for the Johnny Walker Dread Show.
So what was the gist of her research? Well, people smell different. And evil white people, the privileged, consider those who come from the unwashed classes as stinky. This then becomes a form of oppression. Olfactory oppression, to be more precise. So she went rooting around in old novels for instances where the author mentioned smell and how people characterize others based on these odors. And that's about it. I think she misses the mark entirely. We don't define repulsive odor based on the class of people who give off these odors. I believe we have refined our definition of pungent to move away from the natural. It's how we separate ourselves from the animals. For the same reason, we employ a lot of cultured habits around the dinner table. We use knives and forks because animals don't. In this guise, we probably associate bad smell with those who we perceive as living more animalistic. Not showering, smelling like you just killed something rotten and ate it, not holding your farts around guests. Animals don't do those things. I know this from practical experience because my dachshund Frankie really cuts loose around strangers, and I mean in a serious way. Unlike what Allie thinks, this attribution of bad smell to animalistic living applies to all races. In this sense, odor is not oppressive. If you smell bad, it's probably because you haven't showered, not because you're black or Mexican or American Indian. And yes, the homeless don't have the opportunities to shower as much as everyone else, and so they tend to smell bad and therefore repulse others. Dims the brakes. What would interest me is if Allie ever showers. If she does, then she's playing part of the role of oppressor, doing that which elevates her above the homeless in olfactory privilege. In fact, using the logic of the woke, smelling good could be described as olfactory privilege. Showering and using deodorant is like building a mansion in a homeless encampment. And you can see how these nutty ideas begin. You could literally go to Twitter or TikTok with such nonsense and get people rallying behind you. One misconception about my previous video, although it could be my fault, surrounds the term jargon. My complaint isn't that Louks uses jargon. There really isn't that much jargon in her abstract, where jargon refers to specialized terms unlikely to be found outside of a certain discipline. Although we should try to avoid jargon whenever practical, jargon is unavoidable. The Hamiltonian in physics is jargon, but I'll use the term because that's the precise word used to describe the energy extraction operator of a quantum system. When she uses terms like bifurcated and spectrum, she's not using jargon. My problem with her abstract centers on bloat. She pads every sentence with complexity to make herself sound smart. So what? The use of such unnecessary academic language poses two problems. One, it masks the worthlessness of their research. Judging by the abstract, Louks really doesn't do much in her dissertation. That is, nothing of much value is gained. This was largely a self-serving exercise in satisfying one's own curiosity, but it looks good on paper to the uninitiated. Second, using haughty, pretentious prose dims interest from outsiders in reading the manuscript and learning from it. Did I bother to read Louks' dissertation? Oh, hell no. You couldn't pay me enough to slog through that drivel. But by pushing away all but the handful of people in her subfield with nothing better to do, it creates an echo chamber where a small number of academics propose all sorts of weird, crazy, and perhaps even harmful ideas with no one to push back. In this way, there is no way to fail a PhD defense. She literally could have written just about any fool thing and gotten away with it. Don't believe me? Consider the following. It has thus become increasingly apparent that physical reality, no less than social reality, is at bottom a social and linguistic construct, that scientific knowledge, far from being objective, reflects and encodes the dominant ideologies and power relations of the culture that produced it, that the truth claims of science are inherently theory-laden and self-referential, and consequently that the discourse of the scientific community, for all its undeniable value, cannot assert a privileged epistemological status with respect to counter-hegemonic narratives emanating from dissident or marginalized communities. Outsiders have no way of checking the logic of this author's claims. Is he making any sense? And a lot of academics would look at this and go, by Jove, I think he's got something there. But he doesn't. The above is pulled from an academic paper written by Alan Sokal, a physicist. He wrote it intentionally to be absurd. I mean, physical reality is a social and linguistic construct? Really? As Sokal admitted, anyone believing this horse manure is, and I quote, invited to try transgressing those conventions from the windows of my apartment. I live on the 21st floor. But all those super brainy academic types would have sniffed this out, right? Well, no. A peer-reviewed academic journal actually published it, then spent the rest of their time complaining that Sokal was unfair in handing them such rubbish to review. My response is that you can't cheat an honest man. Now, before you accuse me of being a typical math geek with no respect for the humanities, in my next video, I'll divert your attention to a research project in music history that I think would actually be worthwhile. Like my video and subscribe to my channel.